actually taken over our media. I mean, you know, we're seeing this in a really, really big way. And, you know, to the example of the New York Times piece, let me find that. This New York Times piece that just, you know, basically totally distorted what's going on in the United States. This is the Jackson confirmation aside, GOP season opening with black voters. As Logout wrote about it over at Daily Kos, the Times starts with Wesley Hunt, a black Republican running in a deep red Texas district, and Jennifer Ruth Green, a black Republican running in Indiana. Neither of them thinks that the attacks on Judge Jackson will cost them votes. They found and then the New York Times found an average voter, a guy named Roshan Knowles in Gary, Indiana, African-American. Excuse me, I said a guy, it's a woman. She's leaning toward voting Republican. Why? Well, because she refused to get vaccinated and then lost her job. Oh, by the way, she voted for Trump in 2020. These are the average black people that the New York Times is finding to interview to be the example of the national opinion of black people in the United States about the Biden administration and about how these white senators on the Senate Judiciary Committee treated Judge Jackson. I mean, you know, it's just nuts. The article said, quote, even black voters who watched the hearings were surprisingly forgiving of their Republican inquisitors. Really? Their support for this was, you know, like one guy who was like, yeah, okay, it was fine with me. And then finally they turned to this discredited Republican apologist suspended by CNN because of past sexual assault allegations, Paris Denard, a.k.a. the Black Jeffrey Lord, says this author over on Daily Kos, who boasted the Republicans had set up 8 centers nationwide to engage black voters. That's right, 8 nationwide. Wow. So the New York Times, again, to recap this, for this article about how black people in America are responding to the way that Judge Jackson was savaged by white Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee, the New York Times interviewed 6 black Republicans, candidates and office holders, 0 Democratic candidates or office holders, 3, quote, average black voters, 1 who is anti-vax, 1 who doesn't like Biden, 1 who is a 2020 Trump voter, and 1 Republican commentator who is pro-Trump. This is the New York Times. So the administration is looking at this and seeing that, you know, they're across rural America right now, and this is a real problem. Across rural America right now, you know, with 1,500 right-wing radio stations and all of the social media stuff that's happening. And social media has become a much bigger influence in many people's lives recently because of the pandemic. I mean, people are just home more. The Biden administration is trying to do outreach to red states, to rural areas in America. Not because they think it's good politics. They're not talking about this. They're not publicizing it. I think they should be. But the American media is paying absolutely 0 attention to this. Now, you can imagine if during the Republican, you know, when Donald Trump was in office, the Republican Party had done an outreach to people who live in big cities. Oh, yeah, the GOP is going to do outreach to city dwellers, people who live in New York and Los Angeles and San Francisco. We're going to try and flip them to the right. It would have been national news. I mean, just consider that for a moment. It would have been, you know it, it would have been. So here's what the Democrats are doing. This is what the Biden administration is not talking about, they're doing. This is, again, from Heather Cox Richardson's Substack piece, which I strongly recommend that, you know, if you want to get a daily dose of real history and, you know, what's going on in the world, it's just a great read. And just like all the Substacks, you know, you can subscribe for free and get the vast majority, I mean, pretty much everything that she's producing. But it's just remarkable. Anyway, she says the White House has taken on the idea that Democrats are unpopular in rural areas. On March 31st, the Department of the Interior announced a $420 million investment in clean water in Iowa, Minnesota, Montana, New Mexico, North Dakota, and South Dakota. Today, the president announced a $440 million commitment to an America the Beautiful challenge to attract up to $1 billion in private and philanthropic donations to conserve land, water, and wildlife across the country. It also released a 17-page bipartisan playbook. This is the Biden administration, to help rural communities identify more than 100 federal programs designed to fund rural infrastructure. It explains how to apply for funds to expand rural broadband, how to clean up pollution, how to improve transportation, how to fix rural bridges and roads, how to ensure clean water and sanitation, how to prepare for disasters, including climate change, how to upgrade the electrical grid. I mean, this falls into the category of our government is doing things for you, which is the exact opposite of neoliberalism, which is the government shouldn't do anything for anybody. Neoliberalism preaches that the private sector should be doing all these things. They're also, the Biden administration is also sending officials into rural communities. Tom Vilsack, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, EPA Administrator Michael Regan, Interior Secretary Deb Haaland, and Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, and Infrastructure Coordinator Mitch Landrieu. They're all on the road right now. They're traveling in rural areas all over America. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which had, gotten back billions of dollars stolen from average working class Americans by big banks and financial institutions, and given that money back to those Americans. It was gutted by Trump. Biden has put this thing back together, and it's investigating and holding accountable debt collectors that violate patients' rights. They're taking on medical debt, which is a huge problem. She notes that last week, again, did you hear this in the news? The Biden administration extended the moratorium on federal student loan programs until the end of August. And they eliminated the debt of 8 million federal student loan borrowers. Did you hear about that? This happened last week. None of this stuff is like, popping up in the top of corporate media. They just want to talk about the Republican agenda. The corporate media is all about what Republicans are doing. You're not going to hear about what Democrats are doing, generally speaking, on corporate media. Finally today, Biden nominated this was yesterday, nominated Steve Dettelbach. He's a former U.S. attorney, a prosecutor from Ohio, to run the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives, ATF-E. It's been 7 years since the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms had a Senate-confirmed director, because the anti-gun safety people, the Republicans in the United States Senate, have refused to basically put anybody into this position. They've only confirmed one director in the last 16 years. Yesterday, Biden, rolled out this rule on ghost guns. Ghost guns are guns that, have no serial numbers. You basically get kits and you put them together at home. Polls show widely more than 80% of Americans support background checks for gun buyers and a ban on ghost guns. But nonetheless, the gun owners of America vowed to fight that rule. Then we get into, and Heather Cox Richardson gets into this, the largest fraud in American history happened in the last year of the Trump administration, when the Trump administration passed out over $80 billion. They passed out about $800 billion. And the estimate right now is that $80 billion of that was stolen, because the Trump administration, as they were passing out this money to giant corporations and to all of these new companies that were being started by friends of Jared Kushner, not making this up, friends of Jared Kushner, just starting these ad hoc companies and getting multi-million-dollar contracts, billion-dollar contracts in some cases, from the Trump administration with no vetting, no verification checks. The best estimates of the Biden administration are that during the last year of the Trump administration, swindlers made off with somewhere between $90 and $400 billion out of the COVID unemployment relief program and another $80 billion from a different COVID relief program. And then, of course, Jared Kushner gets $2 billion from the Saudis in exchange for what I think is fairly obvious, in exchange for his looking the other way. This is corporate media whittling away at our democracy, as the Republican Party is committed to maintaining neoliberalism and pushing it to its endpoint, which is neo-fascism. This is how bad it is.